Hey there, folks. Let me tell you about a wild turn of events that happened to me not too long ago. I was down in Florida for a work trip, spending time with my buddy Dan. We were just hanging out, catching up like we usually do, when he brought up something unexpected. Dan mentioned his partner, Elliot, was going through a pretty rough patch and could really use some support. Now, Dan and I go way back, not just as friends but as business partners too. We usually take care of our clients ourselves, dividing the workload based on who's available. But Elliot and his wife weren't just clients. They were practically family. They had stuck with us for over 15 years, and on top of that, they'd invested a huge chunk of money in our business. You don't just turn your back on people like that, not when they've been there through thick and thin. At the time, things were pretty quiet for me. My kids had already packed off to college, and my wife, Sarah, was visiting an old friend in Nashville. So, with nothing tying me down, I figured I'd head to Florida, see what I could do to help Elliot out. Plus, it gave me a good excuse to drop in on my Uncle Tony. He's one of those characters you never get tired of. Lives near Miami, always got a story to tell, and he's probably the coolest guy I know. So, I packed my bags, grabbed a flight, and before I knew it, I was sitting on Tony's balcony, the ocean breeze in my face, a cold beer in my hand. Tony was in full form, talking about the old days and pointing out random boats passing by like he was the mayor of the marina. Every few minutes, he'd grab his trusty binoculars and start commenting on the people floating by. It was Tony's version of primetime television. At one point, as he squinted through those binoculars, I couldn't help but laugh. "Hey, Tony," I said, leaning back in my chair, "you ever gonna finish that story you started? You know, the one about the guy at the bar who thought he could pick you up?" Tony grinned at me but kept his eyes glued to whatever he was watching. "Patience, kid," he replied. "When you get to be my age, it ain't every day you get to see something like this." Curious, I leaned forward as he handed me the binoculars. "What are you talking about?" I asked. I put the lenses up to my eyes and sure enough, I saw what he was so entertained by: 3 young girls on a sailboat, waving at us. And well, they weren't wearing any tops. They were laughing, splashing each other with water, completely carefree. Tony just chuckled and took the binoculars back. "See what I mean?" he said, shaking his head like he'd seen it all before. "That's just life, kid. That's how it goes." We spent the next few hours catching up on family, talking about this and that, and knocking back a few more beers. By the time the sun started to dip below the horizon, I was starting to think about food. My stomach was growling, and Tony must have picked up on it because he suggested we head out to grab dinner at this little steak joint just down the street. Said it was the best in town. So I was all in. We set off, walking leisurely down the street toward the restaurant, but Tony kept his binoculars slung over his shoulder. I didn't think much of it until we passed by the river again. Tony suddenly stopped in his tracks, bringing the binoculars up to his eyes like he'd spotted something interesting. "Holy cow," he muttered, his face tightening up in a way that told me he wasn't just looking at some random boaters. He handed me the binoculars without saying a word, and I lifted them to my eyes. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It was a small boat, slowly drifting with the current. There were 2 people on board, a man lying on his back and a woman straddling him, moving up and down with way too much enthusiasm for something that should have been private. The woman had long hair, and she was wearing nothing but a tattoo on her shoulder. I lowered the binoculars, my heart racing. But then curiosity got the best of me, and I looked again, trying to make sense of it. That tattoo, it was familiar. And that woman, my God, it hit me like a truck. That woman was Sarah, my wife. My breath caught in my throat, and I pulled the binoculars away like they'd burned me. My heart was pounding, my stomach dropped. I felt Tony's eyes on me, but I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. There was no mistaking it. My wife, Sarah, was with another man. You know, after seeing Sarah on that boat with that guy, I was completely stunned. I mean, how could I not be? But I didn't let it crush me right then and there. I knew if I was going to get to the bottom of this, I had to stay calm. Losing it wasn't going to get me anywhere, and I needed to understand what was really going on. After that shocking moment with the binoculars, I told Tony I needed some time alone, and I headed back to my hotel. Sitting there in that quiet room, it all started sinking in. The disbelief was hitting hard, but I wasn't going to jump to conclusions without getting some real answers. So, I decided to call Sarah and see what she had to say. It was still early in the evening, and she wasn't expecting me to check in. When she picked up the phone, I could tell right away something was off. There was a slight tremble in her voice, like she was caught off guard. "Hey," she said, sounding surprised. "I wasn't expecting you to call right now." I played it cool. "Yeah, I've been trying to reach you, but I guess our schedules haven't been lining up. You got a minute?" There was a pause, and then she said, "I'm actually just getting out of the shower. How about I call you back in a little bit?" Her voice was calm, but I could sense that nervous energy creeping in. I told her, "Sure, no rush. Give me a call when you're free." Hanging up the phone, I sat back and stared at the ceiling. I knew she wasn't in any shower. She was covering for me, plain and simple. My mind wandered back to all those supposed trips to Nashville. How many times had she told me she was visiting her friend? How many times had I believed her without a second thought? About an hour later, Sarah called me back. I made sure to sound relaxed, like nothing had happened. We talked about little things, how her trip was going, what I was up to in Florida. She said she loved me and missed me, told me she couldn't wait to see me when she got home on Saturday. I smiled to myself, trying to process it all. The crazy thing was, I still believed she loved me. I didn't think she was trying to hurt me on purpose. Sarah had always been restless, like someone who couldn't stay in one place for too long. Maybe this wasn't about me. Maybe she was just trying to fill some kind of void in her life. The next morning, I met up with Elliot, like I'd planned. He was still dealing with his own stuff, and I did my best to focus on him, but my mind kept drifting back to what I'd seen the day before. After we talked for a bit, I had some time to myself, so I made a decision that felt both crazy and necessary. I want to see a private investigator. The guy I met with was professional, quiet, and not too pushy. I told him everything. How I'd seen Sarah on that boat, how I had no idea who the guy was, and how I didn't want to make any drastic moves without knowing the full story. "I don't need you to spy on them or anything like that," I told the investigator. "I just want to know who this guy is. Where's he from? What does he do for a living? I'm not trying to ruin lives here. I just need some clarity." The investigator nodded, took down the details, and I handed him a picture of Sarah. As I walked out of his office, I felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. I wasn't proud of the fact that I needed to hire someone to look into my own wife, but at the same time, I couldn't live in the dark. I needed answers. Before I left Florida, though, something else was gnawing at me. I called up Stephanie, a woman I knew from back home. Stephanie was tall, beautiful, with striking red hair, and she lived just a few blocks from me. She was in her 30s, single, and always seemed to be dating different guys. Over the years, we'd exchanged a few flirty comments, but nothing had ever come of it. Well, except for that one time, about 3 years ago, when she asked me to sleep with her. I was floored. Flattered, sure, but I had turned her down. I was a married man, and I wasn't going to cheat on Sarah. At least, not then. But now? Now I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah with that guy on the boat. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. So, I made a decision, one I wasn't sure I'd regret later or not. I called Stephanie and asked her if she wanted to grab dinner. To my surprise, she said yes, almost like she'd been waiting for me to ask. After that dinner with Stephanie, I spent the next few days in Florida feeling pretty messed up. My mind was all over the place, constantly swinging between anger, confusion, and that nagging feeling of betrayal. Even though things with Stephanie were a temporary distraction, they didn't really take my mind off Sarah. I kept going back to what I saw on that boat and wondering how I was supposed to handle it. Then, out of the blue, I got an email from the private investigator I'd hired. The subject line was simple: information about Sarah. I hesitated for a second before opening it, my heart racing, but I knew I couldn't avoid the truth any longer. When I finally clicked on it, there it was, the answer to everything that had been eating away at me for days. The investigator's report was detailed, giving me the name of the guy I'd seen on the boat with Sarah. His name was Roger. Turns out, he was a sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. A quick search told me he was doing pretty well for himself, but that wasn't the part that got to me. What hit the hardest was reading about his reputation. Roger wasn't just some random guy. He had a bit of a history. Apparently, he was known for having affairs with married women. The investigator even included a few pictures of them together, Sarah and Roger, looking all cozy. One of the photos showed them walking out of a restaurant, laughing like nothing else in the world mattered. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to absorb everything. Roger and Sarah had met at some work conference months ago. According to the investigator, Roger had been the one chasing after Sarah, charming her, pursuing her. And after what must have been weeks of persistence, she finally gave in. They'd arranged to meet in Florida for a little getaway, and I had just happened to stumble upon them. Learning that Sarah had been cheating on me for longer than I realized was like a punch to the gut. I felt a wave of betrayal so deep it was hard to breathe for a second. It wasn't just about seeing her with another man. It was knowing she had kept this secret from me for so long. But despite all the anger, despite feeling like my entire marriage had been built on some kind of lie, I couldn't shake the fact that I still loved her. I didn't want to throw everything we'd built away, not without at least trying to fix it. When Sarah got back from her trip, I decided I had to confront her. There was no avoiding it now. The minute she walked through the door, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to just yell, to scream at her for what she'd done, but I kept my cool. We sat down, and I told her everything. I told her about the boat, the investigator, Roger, everything I had found out. As I spoke, I could see her face slowly crumble. She didn't try to deny it or make excuses. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she broke down right in front of me. She apologized over and over, saying she was sorry for hurting me, sorry for lying, and that she loved me. She was devastated, no doubt about it. But in that moment, I wasn't looking for apologies. I was trying to figure out what came next. Was this the end of our marriage, or was there something left to salvage? After a long pause, I told her that I wanted to try and work things out. But, and this was a big but, there were going to be some serious conditions if we were going to move forward. First, I told her she needed to get help. I wanted her to see a therapist, someone who could help her understand why she'd done this, and we also needed to start seeing a marriage counselor together. This wasn't something we could just brush under the rug. And the most important thing? She had to cut Roger out of her life completely. No more secret meetings, no more messages, no more anything. If she couldn't commit to that, then we were done. Sarah agreed to everything I said. She was scared, I could tell. She was heartbroken too, probably at the thought of what she'd almost lost. But more than that, she knew she needed to change. This was the first time I'd seen her so vulnerable, and I think it shook her to the core. Maybe it was what she needed to finally confront her own issues. Over the next few months, things were tough. There's no sugarcoating that. We went to therapy regularly, both individually and as a couple. We spent long hours talking about our marriage, our mistakes, and how we could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't an easy road, and there were days when I questioned if it was even worth the effort. But slowly, little by little, we started to make progress. I could feel the walls between us coming down. We also made a point of spending more quality time together, doing the things we used to love. It was like we were learning how to be a couple all over again. I wouldn't say everything's perfect now. It never will be. Our marriage will never be the same as it was before, but that doesn't mean it's broken. It's just different. And in some ways, maybe that's okay. We're still here, working on it, trying to build something stronger and healthier than what we had before. At the end of the day, I'm hopeful. We've been through the fire, and we're still standing. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. After Sarah and I had been working on our relationship for a while, things felt like they were starting to stabilize. But, despite all the progress we were making, I still found myself drawn to Stephanie. I knew it wasn't right, especially after everything Sarah and I had been through, but something about Stephanie just kept pulling me in. I spent more and more time with her. We went on dates, hung out, and honestly, I enjoyed every moment. There was this undeniable attraction between us that was hard to ignore. Stephanie was fun, easy to talk to, and made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But as much as I was enjoying my time with her, deep down, I knew I was hurting Sarah. It wasn't fair to her, especially after what she had gone through, and I started feeling this heavy guilt weighing on me. I was torn. stuck between two people I cared about in very different ways. I loved Sarah, always had, but I couldn't deny the feelings I had for Stephanie either. It was like I was living two different lives, trying to figure out which one I wanted more. And then one day, after a lot of internal back and forth, I decided to be honest with Sarah. It wasn't easy, but I sat her down and told her about Stephanie. I could see the hurt in her eyes as I spoke, but she didn't get angry. Sarah, in her usual calm and composed way, told me that she didn't want me to be unhappy. She said she understood that after everything that had happened between us, I might need time to figure things out. It was in that moment that I realized how much Sarah truly cared about me, about us. She was giving me space, despite knowing how much pain it caused her. That hit me hard. I told Sarah that I loved her and wanted to be with her, but that I was confused and needed time to sort out my feelings. Over the next few weeks, I thought long and hard about my relationships with both Sarah and Stephanie. I tried to figure out what was driving me to see Stephanie in the first place. Was it just excitement? A distraction from everything Sarah and I had gone through? The more I thought about it, the clearer things became. I realized that, while I had feelings for Stephanie, it wasn't the same kind of love I had for Sarah. And more importantly, I was hurting Sarah by continuing to see someone else. In the end, I made the decision to end things with Stephanie. It wasn't easy, and I won't pretend like it was a simple choice, but it was the right thing to do. I met up with Stephanie and told her I couldn't keep seeing her. She was sad, of course, and a bit disappointed, but she took it better than I expected. Stephanie had always known that my heart wasn't fully in it with her. She understood why I needed to walk away. After that, I turned all my attention back to Sarah. We continued working on our marriage, focusing on open communication and spending more time together. We didn't just rebuild what we had before. We created something stronger, something more real. We both came out of that rough patch with a deeper understanding of each other. I'm happy to say that, after everything, our relationship is stronger than ever. It wasn't easy getting here, but it was worth it. We learned so much from what we went through, and we're both committed to making this work. It's not about forgetting the past or pretending things didn't happen. It's about learning from those mistakes and moving forward, together. Here's the end of my story. After breaking things off with Stephanie, Sarah and I really dug in and focused on our marriage. Therapy, long talks, and spending quality time together became our new normal. It wasn't easy. It never is when you're picking up the pieces, but we made it through. We learned so much, not just about each other but about ourselves. I realized that love is far more complicated than I ever thought, and that real love takes constant effort. But here we are, stronger than ever. Our relationship's been tested, but we came out the other side better for it. I'm truly grateful for Sarah. Despite everything, she's been my rock. And I've grown from this experience, become a better person, a better husband. So that's it. It's been one hell of a journey, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.